Hi, I'm Jessica Alderson, the Head of Global Research at Workthere. And today we're going to be discussing the outlook for the flexible office market in Ireland with Brian Moran and Frankie McSwiney, the founders of NoCo, and Michael Healy, our Head of Workthere Ireland. So yeah, maybe to start, could you just give a little bit of context around what the office landscape looks like at the moment in Ireland? Are people mostly working from home still? Are they starting to go back to the office?
Will I step in there?
Yeah, go for it, Michael.
Yeah. So the office market. Well, there was a complete lockdown, which we're coming out of now. So far, there's been 2 phases of easing related to offices. So, like in Savills' perspective, when we opened our office, 10% of our staff went back, and now we're at 40%. So, what we've primarily done is brought our sales teams back into the office, and I think that trend is evident with other office occupiers. But some have put off going back into the office until later this year, and some in fact are saying they're not going back at all in 2020. But there has been a general pickup in activity. Traffic volumes have increased, and you can see that there has certainly been an increase in activity. Viewings have started off again. There's a couple of requirements that have been reactivated in the market, looking to take both serviced office space and traditional office space towards the latter end of this year and early into 2021. So, we're slowly emerging out of the lockdown.
Yeah, and what are you seeing at NoCo? Are people gradually starting to come back to your offices?
Yeah, I think it's the same. I think we're all following the kind of the government guidelines in terms of what occupancy we should have in our space. But yeah, like Mike was saying, I think certain people who are more attuned to work from home can remain working from home, and we're kind of bringing the critical people back into HQ. Obviously, social distancing and following the best practices is important. But there's definitely a little bit of an uptake. We're quite central here in our offices in Dublin. And you can see the buzz is slowly starting to come back, which I think is great.
Yeah. There's a bit of an evolution happening as well. I think people, companies they're slowly trying to figure out what the office of the future actually looks like. Obviously we're very early days in terms of social distancing guidelines, or maybe there's temperature checks coming into buildings, increased hygiene protocols. So I think employers particularly are obviously quite cautious. So I think when we see that lag of people coming back into the office. But as Frank was saying, you can slowly see a buzz sort of feeding back into the city for kind of like essential workers and workers essential in the different companies. So it's getting there.
Yeah, it's kind of similar, I think, to what we're seeing in the UK as well, kind of like a similar stage. So we've been getting quite a lot more inquiries from people who are looking to work closer from home, and I think it's probably a mixture of now flexible working is much more accepted, and I suspect that will be something that's here to stay. But also people are wanting to avoid public transport in this new COVID-19 era. And I understand that you at NoCo focus on the hub and spoke model. Is this a trend that you've been seeing as well?
Yeah, I think there's a pre and post COVID story to what we're doing. I think commuting has always been an issue, and it's been a growing issue, particularly in Dublin, and it's obviously taken longer and longer to come in. I personally would spend about 90 minutes on some days getting in and out of the city. I think what sort of happened post-COVID is rather than maybe time necessarily being an issue, I think safety and health and hygiene has come into it. Employers don't want to force their staff to take public transport. So they're where before they were being flexible in terms of working arrangements. I think it's just a necessity now not to have their staff coming in. There's obviously potential risks to have people coming in. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build out a network of flexible office space in the kind of commuter regions of Dublin. And what that allows us to do is package that up and bring it to an employer who's based in the city centre, so that they can then implement a hub and spoke model. So in all the major commuter areas, they can actually provide their staff with a private, secure access office. That's a little bit closer to home. We're aiming for that, maybe 15 to 20 minute sweet spot of a maximum travel period. So, because we've seen a shift really in the last couple of years from a talent attraction and retention perspective, that, talent, they want more flexibility, they want time back in their lives, they want to, pursue maybe a kind of a more healthy, balanced lifestyle, and when you give up the time every day to travel, an hour plus into town, that's quite difficult. So, so that was driving the flexible work practice previously, and I think that's still prevalent now. There's been research released with Mark research and AIB in the last couple of weeks that actually shows people are pursuing more healthy lifestyles. They're home cooking more. They're doing a bit more DIY. They're spending more time with family. All the kind of things that create that better balance in life. So I think that's becoming more at the forefront of employers' minds. So that's what we're trying to service, and that's what we're trying to offer with a hub and spoke model.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of my friends have found that that's the case, that they've really enjoyed not spending as long commuting and just having a bit more time to do other things, whether it's cook or spend more time with family and things like that. It does make sense. And I guess there's also the added benefit of less emissions as well. And there's obviously a huge focus on sustainability now.
Yeah, huge. I think as well from a sustainability perspective, the employers that we've spoken to, certainly the last couple of weeks, they can see that there's a more sustainable, or an opportunity, to create a more sustainable talent attraction policy. There's a much bigger market of talent outside of the city that's maybe not being looked at, or that are forced to travel into the city. So, there's a great flow of talent that employers can actually take advantage of out there. So that sustainability, translates obviously into the environment and into people's daily lives, but there's just huge benefits there as well from an employer's perspective to create a much more sustainable talent flow into their business.
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. And so we've talked about the advantages of the hub and spoke model. What do you think are the challenges?
Yeah, I think like any big change, with especially the large corporations that we're speaking to, is trying to just mobilize something like this. So, there's large workforces that they're trying to onboard to a new way of working, and which goes with that is even internally is the time and effort of acquiring these new satellite offices, the fit out, the CapEx requirement to get them up to a standard that's suitable for their workforce. And that all kind of becomes a massive project kind of overnight, which I think we're definitely seeing is one of the biggest challenges with the corporates. Is they all want to do this and they all like the idea of this flexible workforce, but how do they do it when they have 1,000 people that come to work, all different departments, different ages, different needs, I suppose. And now they're I suppose, even because of the whole COVID world where we're all seeing each other, sitting in each other's houses, we're getting a much better idea of what those needs and what corporates need to do to basically facilitate this kind of hub and spoke model.
It's a tough time for employers, and companies, because they can see the benefits, in a bit of a forced experiment with home working. They can see the benefits. They can see there's no major drops in productivity, but there's a huge amount of barriers, like Frankie was saying, large CapEx outlays, just the logistics of finding suitable spaces in multiple locations is just it's a bit of a logistical nightmare. So but on the balance of that, they can see that there's massive talent retention benefits. There's massive kind of workforce management benefits, talent attraction benefits, and actually being in these areas and having a presence in the areas where people are actually living. I think previously they've tailored their real estate strategies to maybe the millennials who are kind of like to work and like to live in the city, and have the buzz of the city. But obviously those millennials kind of age, and they enter into a new life stage with kind of firmer commitments, and they may move out of the city. They've got mortgages, childcare, kind of they start to value time a lot more. So there's a cohort in these companies that really, really value that time and really value being able to work closer to home. So I think at the moment there's there just hasn't been a need for, I suppose, something like what we're providing. But in the build up with the demand and flexibility over the last couple of years, I pair that with what we're kind of seeing at the moment in the current environment at the moment. That demand is just growing, and it's certainly going to be serviced in the future.
Yeah, and I think one thing is being accelerated by this is we're following government guidelines now, and everyone's looking at September when schools are going back and what the plan is there. It's all going to be staggered timelines or drop-offs, and corporates are going to have to adapt to that. So the way we see it is if these people can work closer to home, that kind of disruption becomes less. So the workplace, I suppose, is becoming more in tune with life and times and all this kind of new ways of working. Even between in our business, you see people are, trying to juggle everything. And if the fact that we're now working from home is kind of making that juggle a bit easier. But as we all go back to the office, it's going to have to be that hybrid approach of this hub and spoke model that allows people to kind of adapt to their new routine. But again, that's going to be hugely challenging for these corporates, how they manage that, how teams work, especially here in Dublin, with the large kind of tech cluster we have is time zones. So how are they facilitating American hours with European hours? And all that's going to have to be catered for now in this kind of new world of workplace strategy.
There's a massive opportunity actually with to increase your flexibility, just given taking the point of the time zones there. I mean, we're big advocates of utilizing all aspects of your real estate portfolio. So, you have staff working from home, the mixture or a hybrid approach of working from home, working from a satellite office, and working from HQ. Going back to the advantage of running a model like that, there's a massive cost play there, which I'm sure Michael has had conversations about in recent times. And then there's a huge flexibility there. So obviously, there's been a massive demand over the last couple of years for flexible offices for whatever reasons, obviously individual to each company, but there's added benefits now, rather than just flexibility. You can service your productivity better with a better real estate strategy. You can service your talent's needs a lot better. So whether it's flexibility or whether they need more time or healthier lifestyle, whatever that is, I think using all aspects of those real estate portfolios is key.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so there's been quite a lot of talk about management agreements being more prominent in the future, and we're definitely seeing that starting to play out in the UK. Michael, is that something that you're seeing across the board with providers that you talk to? And also Brian and Frankie, is that something that you're considering yourself?
So far in a Dublin context, management agreements haven't been that evident. So there, I can think of a handful of management agreements that have taken place between serviced office providers and landlords. The majority of those would tend to be in suburban or city fringe locations. It's be very difficult for a serviced office provider to get a management agreement on a prime grade A building in the middle of the city centre. Just the demand is such for that type of product that landlords want to hold out for an institutional tenant taking an institutional lease. And as well as that, our prime buildings are typically a lot smaller than what you would have in London. So where in London you might see a landlord letting a portion of their building, a floor or two, on a management agreement. That type of take in a grade A building in Dublin city centre could be a third of the space. So I do think it will, though, increase in popularity. I mean, there are landlords in Dublin who want to kind of dip their toe into the serviced office market, and some have looked at setting up their own serviced office businesses. But I think, by getting into bed with the service provider on a management agreement will be a kind of an opportune way for them to dip their toe without having to employ X number of people and provide the service.
Yeah.
I think what we've seen in the conversations that we've had with landlords, they see it, particularly in kind of uncertain markets like we have now in the property sector. They see it as an alternative to, potentially keep a property kind of moving and keep it relevant in the market and, keep it active. So that's, I suppose, the appetite that we've seen as we've gone out to the market, searching for space, is that there's a desire to look at alternative arrangements to fill their buildings. It's very hard to fill a big empty building with one tenant. Why not do it gradually with multiple tenants and keep that building ticking over, and keep momentum moving through the property. So there's different motivations, but like we can see there's certainly a rise in appetite for the alternative agreements.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, everyone wants to kind of dip their toe in different areas. So landlords want to get involved in the flex space. So in bigger, I suppose, parks outside the city centre in Dublin, we're able to add a huge amount of value and bring that kind of diversity to the park, rather than just having, a number of institutional tenants. We're able to add a kind of a diverse network to their parks as well, and there's kind of a couple of other things that we can bring in terms of occupancy levels, which are quite attractive, and even other things in terms of suppliers to the park, which again adds to the value of the entire complex rather than just the individual building within that park.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about quite a few kind of, I guess, trends that we're seeing. Do you think that COVID-19 has really fundamentally changed the flexible office landscape, or do you think it's more accelerated trends that were already happening?
Yeah, I think it's probably accelerated trends. I think it's definitely, we're still probably in the middle of it, so who knows what will be the actual outcome of this, but I definitely think it's enabled organizations to, I suppose, dip their toe in the remote working or the flex working because they've had to, rather than, before pre-COVID, I think it was always a nice to have and a nice conversation, but it never wanted to be, we'll be the first in our sector to go do this. But I think as COVID has developed, it's definitely changed the mindset of these kind of top tier corporates that we speak to, and they're going, well, actually, we now have to do this for multiple reasons. I also think a big thing that it's changed is, within organizations, it now becomes a multi-department problem. It's not just either a property partner problem or a people problem. It's across departments going, we need to, as an organization, adopt this new way of working. And I think flex is definitely part of that now conversation.
On the people aspect, I think it's gone from a conversation, or flexible working or agile working has gone from an individual conversation with between an employee and their line manager or HR director to talking about how they can implement something for the entire workforce. I think certainly we've seen in the I suppose the talent industry is, for the last number of years, there's obviously been a growing demand for that agility and flexibility in work practices, but on an individual basis, not necessarily on an entire company's workforce basis. So I think that's been a fundamental change. And when you have a change like that, you see that type of decision go from line manager or a small team level, right up to the ranks to a board level decision. So it's certainly, again, as Frankie said, we're kind of in the middle of things, and there's no set reaction yet, or there's no set roadmap as to how companies are going to navigate this. But I think that's really where it's going, is treating our target market of commuters, treating them as a cohort and identifying how they can help anywhere from 15 to 25% of a company, as opposed to doing it on an individual basis. So it's an interesting time.
One of the things as well, just we're seeing on the agency side, on the Workthere side of things, is occupiers aren't willing to occupy serviced offices at the capacity that serviced office providers have been advertising. So typically they're selling their space at 1:5 or 1:6 square meters, whereas the socially distanced rating or ratio will be 1:20 square meters. So that's having an impact on the amount of, I suppose, rent that a serviced office provider can charge. But also hot desking or co-working space, certainly, in the short to medium term, it's not going to be particularly popular. And I think serviced office providers are going to have to reconfigure their space to cater for more self-contained suites.
Yeah. Do you think, lots of flexible office providers are thinking about that right now to kind of do over the next few months, say?
I think they have to. They other flexible providers have always been very efficient at actually how they manage their space and their resources, particularly in terms of generating revenue. But I think we've seen a response publicly from most providers that they are tailoring their offering to what their clients needs, as opposed to maybe offering large hot desking areas or whatever it be. I think they're going client by client now, which is obviously what we have to do. We don't necessarily have a standard offering. We work with every client on an individual basis, because depending on their industry, their size of the organization, or just the ways that they already work, there's a total difference in what the needs are from kind of company to company. So it's certainly a time for other providers to look at themselves and look at their offerings, and there's huge opportunities there to pivot their offerings and obviously tailor for their clients. So
I think across all of the corporates real estate, they're looking at how the space is being used. So again, what flex was traditionally a need for space to grow into, or collaborative space, where there was access to meeting rooms, hot desking, and kind of co-working spaces. They're now looking at it, well, if you take the approach of you've got your head office, you've got flex space, and you've got working from home, and how is that space used? So I think the operators of the flex space are going to have to adapt based on how corporates now want to use their space, even in line with the social distancing guidelines and all that. How often they're going to have to clean meeting rooms. We've even seen a shift where, will it be designated meeting rooms rather than communal meeting rooms, and things like that. So I think they're going to have to adapt. I think we've even seen, even from our kind of vendors, the fit out guys have been back in, they've been readjusting floor plans, taking furniture out. And as Michael said, the rack and stack kind of idea of putting people into buildings is definitely a thing of the past.
Yeah, no, agreed. So I was also wondering, do you think there's some kind of like pent up demand from corporates that are tied into, say, like, a lease that's ending in, say, 3-4 years, and they do really want to go down the hub and spoke model route, but they just can't do it quite yet? I don't know if they would come to you and talk to you at this stage, or maybe they would wait until they do talk to you. But
I think we've spoken to companies who even have leases as far as 7 years, and I think again what they're doing, just given the time that we're in, given the climate that we're in, they're looking at all options. So it's just, again, going back to the point earlier, it's a time for exploring all different options. So I think we obviously position ourselves in a way that is rather than it being necessarily solely a workforce strategy or a workplace strategy, we kind of sit in the middle. So when you're planning, you're not planning for 2-3 years in advance. You're in those conversations, you're planning probably 10, 15, 20 years in advance. So they're the kind of conversations that we're having at the moment. They're very future oriented conversations as opposed to the here and now. I think in the short term, a lot of corporates are taking advantage of the infrastructure of people being able to work from home and then slowly bringing people in. But as a long-term solution, that potentially what we found isn't a sustainable option for a large workforce of 500 to 1,000 people and up. So
I think so jump in there. I think one of the things we focus hugely on is the talent attraction and retention. That's not a problem just for tomorrow. It's a problem for the foreseeable future. If you can touch on the retention, the kind of the target, the clients we're targeting are ones that have an average tenure of over 5 years. So they're really focusing on the long-term strategy. and how they're actually keeping the really good staff, really good employees in their organisations, rather than it just being a necessity of acquiring more space because of their headcount projections. And the attraction side of it then again is looking at, even in Dublin, is how do we attract people from that commuter belt who have moved out there for various reasons and now don't want to commute. You know, we've seen there's a huge cohort of people that are really well educated, really sought after staff, but they're just not willing to come back into the city. So it's definitely a kind of a long-term strategy for these corporates. So if it's 3, 4, 5 years where they're out of their leases, they're definitely looking and talking to us, going, how do we make this part of our long-term strategy?
Okay, cool. And then final question, what do you think the office landscape will look like in 5 years' time?
I'm going to have Michael kick this one off.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite positive about the office landscape. Of course, I mean, this whole lockdown has thrown a mirror up at how we use office space. And I think, you know, Savills undertook a survey of our occupier clients, you know, asked them how they're dealing with lockdown and the way in which they saw the office environment evolving. So that's called Savills Office Fit. And, you know, the main thing we've taken out of that is that there will be a continued demand for office space, but office design certainly will have to change. So it needs to change in such a way as it can facilitate more remote and agile working, but also cater for, you know, more collaborative space, social space, etc. So I think certainly office space design will change, and I think more occupiers will be looking at the likes of the hub and spoke model. So rather than having their employees working from home, they will have give some of their colleagues or employees optionality about working closer to home. As you touched on, Jessica, you know, we're all thinking about the environment now. We've seen the benefits of, you know, commuting and what have you being reduced, and the impact that's had on the environment, less diesel fumes, etc. And I think that's something that, you know, people will want to get out of their work. They'll also be hopefully cycling to work more and what have you, rather than using public transport. So yeah, I think, and just in a Dublin context, there's a huge amount of international companies based here. You know, it's transformed from, you know, the last downturn, where the office market was mainly home to, you know, indigenous office occupiers. That's changed. So a lot of these companies will continue to have a need for office space, whether that's in the middle of the city centre or on the periphery. So I think the outlook for the office market in Dublin is quite positive.
And I think one thing that we've seen from those we're speaking to is there's going to be a huge focus on the occupancy and the efficiency of these buildings, you know, whether it's from an environmental or sustainable point of view, but at a basic level, it's just how are they ensuring that these buildings are being used and across the hub and spokes, whether that's someone working from home, their desk is free then in HQ, or their desk is free in their satellite office, how they can do that. And again, what we're seeing is where the NoCo platform is enabling these companies to manage that as well. So it's you know, it's one of these areas that I think that is probably hasn't had a huge amount of technology put across it, but it's about how efficiently we can start using our buildings. And that's across all sectors as well. I think it would be a huge thing kind of going into the next few years. The idea of the hot desking was a big trend for the last 5 to 10 years, and now it'll be just how efficiently we can use that space.
I think that's probably and both of you, yourself and Michael, touched on that point. Was it's how these companies are actually using their space and what's influencing that. So, you know, we certainly feel that, you know, the next couple of years, how companies use their real estate portfolio will be, you know, predominantly based on their, you know, meeting their workforce needs. So, you know, it's going to be kind of like a workplace strategy to solve, you know, workforce issues. You know, there's been kind of bubblings of these issues like commuting and you know, work-life balance and the appetite for flexibility in that. You know, we haven't seen many corporates using a real estate strategy to solve those issues. So I think that's going to become more dominant now in the next 5 years. You know, mainly about, you know, what's actually influencing a real estate strategy, and we think it's talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of moving parts and it sounds very complicated, but it also sounds like you guys are doing a great job. So yeah, and with that, I think we will wrap things up. So yeah, it's been really great chatting with you, Brian, Frankie, Michael, and yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Cheers, Jessica.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Jessica.
million.
It's great. Thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks.
Cheers,
Bye.
Michael.